From the earliest periods of the ancient priesthood of Egypt Ka, 5500 BC, the outer walls of the sacred temples featured images of seemingly military-style victories, representing the spiritual battle of good against evil. Archaeologists explain the traditional royal smithing scene and its variations, shown at the temple entrance, the origins of which may stretch back to the very beginnings of Egyptian history. The military exploits of Egyptian kings were often depicted, for symbolic, protective purposes. In all periods, however, the function of these scenes is largely symbolic, for defense of the temple against its enemies, the forces of chaos which existed beyond the sacred precinct. The role of the ancient priesthood thus inherently involved the concept of active protection of the temple against the forces of evil, and priestly recognition and support of the necessity for vigilance and action in defense of positive values. These victory scenes often depict angelic hawks, associated with the angel Isis, flying over the smithing pharaoh, carrying symbols of Holy Spirit blessings to him. This is a powerful symbolic declaration of the ancient theological doctrine that victory in battle is granted by God, which is implicitly based upon the doctrine that such battles, whether physical or spiritual, must be for a holy purpose of a worthy cause. The first etiquette book in history was the papyrus scroll entitled Instruction of Ptahhotep Ka, 2400 BC, discovered in Thebes, Luxor. Even as an etiquette book for pharaonic royalty and the Egyptian priesthood, it mandates steadfast resistance in opposition to all forms of evil. Keep not silence when someone says anything that is evil. Maxim 3. Correct chiefly any misconduct by others. Vice must be drawn out that virtue may remain. Maxim 36. Egyptian Book of the Dead, Chapter 42, Liturgy Against Evil Ka. 1550 BC, British Museum artifact, Papyrus No. 1047117. The Egyptian Book of Going Forth by Day, popularly called the Book of the Dead, which developed from the pyramid texts as early as 2345 BC, was widely used as papyrus scrolls from Ka, 1550 BC. Scroll 42, sometimes called Spell 42, meaning a prayer, is a liturgy for preventing slaughter by overcoming the forces of evil. The shambles is equipped with what you know, Thoth is the protection of all my flesh. There are no men or spirits who shall harm me. I am he in whom is the sacred eye, and nothing shall come into being against me, no evil cutting off and no uproar, and there shall be no danger to me. I am he who adjudges, I am he who protects you, my striking power is in your bellies, my name overpasses everything evil. I am released from all evil. This scroll describes evil as the shambles of chaos of the material world, what you know. The primary protection is Thoth, the angel of knowledge associated with hermetic wisdom, and opening one's inner sacred eye of spiritual knowledge. In this liturgy, the priest, reading it invokes the relevant saints and angels into oneself to embody their spiritual strengths, saying, I am. The liturgy is thus a mandate for the priest, to judge evil actions, to protect the innocent against harm, and to exercise striking power, whether physical or spiritual, all as necessary to overcome the forces of evil. The angel saying, my striking power is in your bellies, means that all humans are charged to be agents of God by taking action in the world. Therefore, in the practice of sacred activism, all spiritual seekers are fully justified, and indeed obligated, to strongly expose, resist and oppose the forces of evil, with vigilance, aggressive persistence, and when necessary even with lawful armed force. All spiritual seekers, as well as all of humanity, have an overriding moral and spiritual duty to actively detect, expose, denounce, condemn, boycott, resist and reject all wrongful abuses, and to exclude and impede those who would inflict harm or injustice upon others. The word wizard comes from those who held the staff of power, which was called the Wsar. Osiris was the life force within creation, his backbone the Djed or Djedhi, hence the force of the Jedi Knights of Star Wars. Osiris was called Sr or Asr Orsia as well as Wasir. The Wasir staffs were electrical conductors of power, hence the wizards were Wasirs or Osiris, using WSR wands for their hexes, hexagon, in Egyptian Heku. Unknown source. The main tenet of the Star Wars universe is completion of the circle, or finding the balance between good and evil. It is a metaphor for knowing whether you are on the wrong side, and whether you are becoming destructive. Ironically enough, the idea of completing the circle with ritual, and of finding balance in awareness, was known in ancient Egypt as raising the Djed. The purpose of the ritual was to preserve order and repel chaos. In order to do this, there first had to be an effort to raise this awareness, or Djed, Those that did this were known as Djedi. Archetypal symbols such as the circle, the spiral, trees, and a pillar or pole were magically and ritually employed to preserve essential order. These symbols all have a connection to the sun and worship of the sun. Historically, the Djed was raised at crucial transitional times between cycles, evoking light and stability to dispel darkness and disorder. Such periods were the winter solstices, the failing years of a reigning monarch, or the coronation of a new one. A tower or an obelisk that is symbolic of the connection and balance of all things in heaven and in earth now represents the Djed. We see this symbol all over the world as secret societies have used it as a backdrop for their empires. http://www.clydelouise.com/dis/sith/sith SHTML. August the 12th and 13th was the time that the Osiris mysteries were shared and performed. The word wizard comes from those who held the staff of power, which was called the Wasar. Osiris was the life force within creation, his backbone the Djed or Djedhi, hence the force of the Jedi Knights of Star Wars. Osiris was called SR or ASR Orsia, as well as Wasir. The Wasir staffs were electrical conductors of power, hence the wizards were Wasirs or Osiris, using WSR wands for their hexes, hexagon, in Egyptian Heku. So there is a very ancient lineage of traditions that have their mysteries imparted on August the 12th and 13th. http://www.unsolvedmysteries.com/USM352612 HTML. Furthermore, the word Jedi recalls the Djedi, the Kemetic third eye of Heru. The prototype of the character Luke Skywalker, who avenges his father's death, as Anakin Skywalker. PAC progress every time Africans cultivate enlightenment. It is the Djedi, the rod of power, which is the reference for Djedi. This energy symbol was built into the pyramid of Cheops Khufu by Thoth and his co-workers. The top part, 5 arrowed ceilings, is manifest in the king's chamber. The Sphinx was the responsibility of Hamarkes. The Djed rod of power is actually the vine or cord to the divine. http://www.citisoftlight.net/Kajan0402 HTML. Originally the Djed represented Netja, who was called Noble Djed, but later on it came to represent Netja, a seer. Djed pillars were painted along the bottom of the coffin to symbolize becoming Orsar in the afterlife and associating the deceased with the royal house of Kem/Kemet. Netja, a seer, was known as the Djedi, see the resemblance to Jedi. The Djedi were called the stable ones, who were entered into the order of a seer, see Mora Tim's Djed history. As she says, they are the wisdom keepers, being the physical representation of a seer on Tar Earth. The Djedi come forth during the changing of the cycles, sun cycle, moon cycle, in means to stabilize a chaotic planet and set everything to order before the coming or with the coming of the new age. As the celestial Asir resurrects, so must the physical Djedi, Asirites, come forth, to be continued Tar-un Nefer. http://chematiselmints virtualave.net/Djed HTML. Consider the tale, first written down in the XVI Ith dynasty from a Middle Kingdom version of a IVTH dynasty original, of Prince Rajadef, the Djedi and King Khufu. The king and his 4 sons are relaxing at the palace telling stories of famous magicians. Rajadef tops them all by announcing that he knows of a living magician equal to those of the past. Khufu is interested, and Rajadef tells him of the Djedi, or stable one, who is apparently ageless and knows many things, including the shrines of the secret chambers of the enclosure of Tehuti. Now Khufu is really interested, because the king had spent much time in seeking for himself these secret chambers of the enclosure of Tehuti to fashion for himself their likeness for his horizon. Khufu dispatches Rajadef to bring the Djedi back to the palace. He returns with the Djedi, who quickly charms and awes the court with his magical abilities. Then the king comes to the point. Now, as for the rumor that you know the number of the shrines of the secret chamber of the enclosure of Tehuti. Djedi says that he does not, although he knows where that information can be found. There is a box of flint in a chamber called the Revision of On. In that box, the Djedi claims that he cannot recover this information, but the eldest of the triplets, then in the womb of the wife of the high priest of Re, Lord of Sakbu, will discover the information and found a new dynasty. http://www.sangrel.com/Bardorian HTM. Osiris Djedi was a title of Osiris as the Great One, 8 Lord of the Universe, the universal, self-generating life principle of the center, i.e. the transcendent self. The Djedi were the stable ones, wisdom keepers of one mind and one spirit, who, as initiates of the Osirian mysteries, comprised the living, terrestrial body of the archetypal celestial Osiris. Contemporary Djedi are self-selecting regenerators of cosmos. They are those who, regardless of race or creed, are awakening to mission in service to the planet and the epochal imperatives of stability, continuity and regeneration. http://alignment 2012.com/Djed, HTML. Between the poles of the crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, the spine of the Nile. The Djed backbone of Orsia or Osiris, the Djedi force. Between the outstretched wings of the spirit of the winged snake and the winged vulture, make the two into one. http://phoenix, akasha, /x plane, HTML. We too have equal opportunity to make it or break it. The discoveries emerging from Egypt describe the existence of a worldwide pyramid temple system in prehistory, mounted like antennae on the key energy meridians, which were employed by ancient priest scientists as a musical system to stabilize the tectonic plates of the planet. Cataclysmic geology at its finest. From the mother tongue word Jdih, meaning the way of the word or the power of the word. The ancient Jdai is this where Lucas got his inspiration for the Jedi Knights. Priests used the language of light to tune the planet like a giant harmonic bell. http://www.cyberspaceorbit.com/text/00news23x, htm. There are 7 planes of existence, the lowest being the physical plane, the plane of the material superficial world, a world in which most of us find ourselves trapped, unable to transcend carnal desires. The 7 planes are associated with the 7 chakras located in the body from the torso to the top of the dome or the head. These are vital centers, where electromagnetic waves resonate throughout the upper portions of the body. The 6th chakra is the third eye, which is located between the eyebrows. The headgear of the pharaoh is the serpent or snake, which is lined in perfect accord with the third eye. The reason being is because the snake represents an electromagnetic energy flow which resonates in the brain at the third eye level. In other words, a snake travels in a zigzag motion, which is equivalent to the way energy waves travel throughout the 7 chakras of the body. Osiris Djedi was a title of Osiris, as the Great One Eight Lord of the Universe, the universal, self-generating life principle of the center, i.e. the transcendent self. The Djedi were the stable ones, wisdom keepers of one mind and one spirit, who, as initiates of the Osirian mysteries, comprised the living, terrestrial body of the archetypal celestial Osiris. The Order of the Temple of Solomon, as the direct continuation of the historical Knights Templar, has preserved the ancient priesthood of Solomon, which includes the most ancient Magi priesthood of the biblical Melchizedek. The Magi priesthood of Melchizedek within the ancient priesthood of Solomon is compatible with the practices of Reformed Catholicism. This more ancient part of the Solomonic priesthood is rooted in the Egyptian Djedi priesthood as the earliest foundations of Christianity, as practiced by the 12th century Templars within Roman Catholicism. It includes elements which later became 15th century Rosicrucianism as Gnostic Protestantism, and 16th century Hermetic Theosophy as part of liberal Catholicism. The Melchizedek priesthood is the Gnostic tradition within the Templar priesthood as a denomination of Solomonic Christianity. Although it is part of the heritage of the ancient priesthood of Solomon, this is an optional and separate specialty, and is not a requirement for clergy in the Solomonic priesthood. Thus, Templar clergy can choose their individual preference for either classical Christianity or the most ancient origins of Christianity. Priestly succession of the Magi priesthood of Melchizedek. The Magi priesthood of Melchizedek, preserved within the ancient priesthood of Solomon, integrates a combination of priesthoods from the earliest times of antiquity, which contribute multiple sources of ecclesiastical authority to the order. The Melchizedek tradition continued through 7 primary sources of magistral succession since ca. 10,068 BC. 1. Original biblical Melchizedek Magi kings from ca. 10,068 BC. 2. Ancient Persian Magi knights from ca. 10,068 BC. 3. Ancient Egyptian Djedhi Magi priests from 5,500 BC. 4. Ancient Sumerian Magi fisher priests from 3,500 BC. 5. The Essenes ca. 250 BC through the Holy See of Antioch ca. 33 AD. 6. Original Al-Banna Magi Sufi order from 825 AD, and 7. Original Syrian Hashishin Sufi order from 1080 AD. This priestly authority is supported by an additional 7 sources of apostolic succession of the ancient priesthood of Solomon, which includes the more ancient Magi priesthood of Melchizedek. All 14 sources of priestly and ecclesiastical authority constitute direct lines of initiatory succession, each additionally perfected by authenticity of doctrinal succession. This establishes a substantial level of ecclesiastical authority, meeting the general standards of the Roman Catholic and Orthodox churches under traditional canon law. As a result, the Magi priesthood of Melchizedek of the Templar order, as restored from the 12th century, is genuinely the direct continuation of the 12,000-year-old priesthood of the biblical Melchizedek, possibly the oldest ecclesiastical authority in recorded human history. Ancient Magi Origins from the Middle East. The ancient priesthood of Solomon, as restored by the 12th century Knights Templar, includes the priestly heritage of the biblical Magi, including the legendary Magi of the East, believed to visit upon the birth of Christ. As established by the historical record, and confirmed by archaeology and authoritative academia, this consists of the most ancient institutional priesthood in known human history, carrying an original spiritual tradition of over 12,000 years, dating back to Ca. 10,068 BC. The Temple of Solomon, first archaeologically excavated by the founding Knights Templar, was fundamentally pharaonic Egyptian, thereby also preserving the most ancient esoteric knowledge derived from earlier Sumeria and Mesopotamia. This highly developed tradition embodied the timeless arts and sciences of the Eastern Magi, represented by the revered biblical figure of the priest-king Melchizedek. At the core of the secrets of the temple is the ancient Egyptian Benu bird of spiritual alchemy, which was later called the phoenix. The guardians of this mystery school throughout many millennia of human history were essentially warrior priest-kings, thus being the earliest form of noble warrior monks, and the direct predecessors of the medieval Knights Templar. Under the sovereign patronage of King Fulk of Jerusalem, the first Templars discovered, learned and mastered the ancient esoteric tradition, becoming the embodiment and continuation of this most ancient sacred order. Although the order had many names over many millennia, the biblical concept given as its ecclesiastical name is the Order of Melchizedek. The significance of archaeological findings by the first Templars was characterized by connecting the roots of Christianity to ancient history of pharaonic Egypt and even earlier ancient Mesopotamia. The biblical source of all ancient origins of Judeo-Christianity is that of King Melchizedek from the Old Testament, Genesis 14:18-20, who blesses Abraham and whose priesthood reappears in the New Testament. Melchizedek is also a key figure in historical Templar mythology, spirituality and symbolism, representing those most ancient roots. The name Melchizedek comes from the ancient words Melech Zedek, which meant king of peace. The name of the biblical King Solomon comes from the word shalom, meaning peace. Thus, Melchizedek and Solomon were both king of peace, and Melchizedek is the ancient precursor and prior source of priesthood for the biblical figure of Solomon. Therefore, the deeper founding roots of the order of the Temple of Solomon indicate that fundamentally, in its origins, it is really the Order of Melchizedek, an ancient esoteric and priestly tradition that was rediscovered by the first Knights of Solomon under the Temple of Solomon. Significance of the Melchizedek priesthood to world civilization. The Magi priesthood of Melchizedek preserved by the Knights Templar as part of the ancient priesthood of Solomon directly connects the order with the oldest civilizations, the ancient pharaonic Egyptian priesthood, including the Djedi guardian priests, the priesthoods of the biblical King Melchizedek and King Solomon, as well as the Essenes, who recorded the Dead Sea Scrolls and Nag Hammadi scrolls, including the Lost Gospels and the Book of Enoch. This lineage of priestly succession also connects the Templar priesthood with some of the most important leaders of civilization in human history, including King Khufu, architect of the Great Pyramid of Egypt, Amenhotep III, father of Queen Nefertiti and grandfather of King Tutankhamun, Sheshonq I, who returned the Ark of the Covenant from the Temple of Solomon to Egypt, and Cleopatra, high priestess of Isis. This ecclesiastical heritage of the original Knights Templar is the most ancient priesthood, predating and underlying all churches, carrying the most sacred knowledge which is literally the very foundation of Christianity, unifying all Christian denominations and connecting Christianity to other venerable world religions. Famous Templar stronghold of Chartres Cathedral in France, designed and built by the Templars, features an Old Testament scene of Melchizedek presenting the holy sacrament of communion to Abraham with a chalice, Genesis 14, 18-20. This scene, prominently displayed by the Templars as a statue at the northern entrance, named the Gate of the Initiates, signifies that the ancient figure of Melchizedek is at the heart of the esoteric mysteries known by the highest level of Templar initiates. During early medieval times, the esoteric knowledge and mysticism of the Melchizedek tradition was largely preserved in the occult societies of the Middle East, connected to the ancient Egyptian priesthood, and embodying ancient Sumerian and Mesopotamian mystery schools. As a result of their perpetual wisdom-seeking during Middle Eastern missions, the Templars were strongly influenced by both the Gnostics and the Assassins, Arabic military order. It is a fact that several of the founders of the Knights Templars were initiates in the sect of the Assassins. While adopting many religious beliefs from the Gnostics, the Templars received many of their organizational and political traits from the Assassins. The Templars represented the first wide-scale attempt to organize and mobilize the forces of occultism, to promote the forces of good over evil throughout the world. The Templars were also greatly influenced by the Ismailis, who were a secret sect of Gnostic Muslims. According to the historian S. Amir Ali, an Indian lawyer whose ancestry traces back to Imam Ali al-Raza and Muhammad, from the Ismailis the Crusaders borrowed the conception which led to the formation of all the secret societies, religious and secular, of Europe. The Knights Templar especially, with their system of Grand Masters, Grand Priors and religious devotees, and their degrees of initiation, bear the strongest analogy to the Eastern Ismailis. Researchers closely link the Arabic mysticism of the Ismailis to Gnosticism. Ismaili theology was thus revelationary in character. The Haqqaiq transcended human reason and ultimately derived from Gnostic doctrines. Both the Assassins and Ismailis were branches of the Gnostic Sufis, who actively practiced spiritual alchemy, and in turn preserved more ancient Magi priesthoods from pharaonic Egypt and earlier Mesopotamia. The Sufi priests were direct lineal descendants from the Djedi Priesthood of Egypt, which was the elite group of Magi high priests, who were guardians and protectors of esoteric knowledge and spiritual wisdom, and thus an earlier model of knights as spiritual warriors. Old Kingdom 4th Dynasty papyrus scrolls, dated ca. 2550 BC, which were recopied for preservation during the 17th dynasty ca. 1560 BC, contain historical accounts of Prince Ra-Jedef, of the elite Djedhi priests being sought by the pharaoh King Khufu, who is associated with designing and building the Great Pyramid. The Djedhi priests in turn were direct descendants from even earlier Magi from Persia, being ancient Mesopotamia. The Mesopotamian Magi high priests, called Nats, were established by King Jamshid of the first Persian kings, during the Persian Golden Age, which historians have dated to as early as 10,068 BC. The Nats were Magi warrior priests under the most famous King Khosrow, who is considered by historians to be the legendary and literary basis for many of the Arthurian tales, often called the Persian King Arthur. The Nats also had a holy grail, called the Natmong, literally the chalice of the knights. The word Nats is very likely to be the origin of the Old English word knights. According to the Sufi scholar and historian Idris Shah, 1924-1996, as soon as the Sufis learned that the first Knights Templar were excavating the Temple of Solomon, those Magi, from the Al-Banna sect, immediately left Egypt to join the Templars in Jerusalem. The Sufi Magi extensively taught and trained the first Templars during their formative years underneath the Temple Mount. They knew that the Temple of Solomon was pharaonic Egyptian and connected to the Djedi Priesthood of Magi, and knew that the Templars would need some direct assistance to learn and master the sacred knowledge that the knights would discover there. Later, when the Templars were more widely established, having fortresses in Syria as well, the Grand Master of the Al-Banna Sufi Magi, Dhul-Nun al-Misri, visited and brought Magi masters to the Templar castles in Syria to reinforce their training and perfect their mastery of the most ancient Magi priesthood. Additionally, the Grand Master of the Assassins, Rashid al-Din Sinan of Syria, 1132–1192 AD, provided extensive cooperation and Magi training of the Templars in the nearby assassin castles in Syria. The historical record indicates that the Templars even had an affectionate nickname for the assassin Grand Master, known as a Magi ascended master, calling him Old Man of the Mountains. During the 18th century, George Frederick Johnson, a Scottish Mason exiled in France, developed and helped popularize many historical interpretations, emphasizing that the Templars were not merely warrior monks, but also enlightened and wise knightly seers, who had used their sojourn in the East to recover its profoundest secrets, and to emancipate themselves from medieval Catholic influence. The Knights Templar are famous for having built the great cathedrals of Europe. Lesser known is the fact that the medieval Templars attributed their unique Gothic technology to instructions of secret building techniques which they found while excavating the Temple of Solomon. The related methods of stained glass used in the cathedrals also came from those secret Gothic techniques, which had been perfected by the assassin founding Grand Master Hassan bin Sabah. Copyright 2015 The Orgo Knights Guild, all rights reserved.